Hi everyone, I'm Meredith, and listen, I'm just a girl stuck in my apartment looking for someone, well, anyone to talk to. So I found some people. My guest today is Jennifer Tepper. Jennifer is a Broadway and New York theater producer, and she's also the creative and programming director at Feinstein's 54 Below, which is a cabaret club here in New York City. So you guessed it, we're talking Broadway. It's shut down 7 months ago because of the pandemic. Can you believe it's been that long? And how and when it's coming back, which can't be soon enough. But before we get to it, don't forget, like and subscribe to the Let's Talk About It channel below. I don't want you to miss new episodes and videos as they come out. Jennifer and I will wait. Okay, did you do it? Oh, great. Jennifer, welcome. Let's talk about it.
Hi, I'm happy to be here. How are you doing?
I'm well. And yourself?
I'm doing good. I'm hanging in there.
You are surrounded by friends, all the theatrical posters. Does it make you feel a little bit closer to the world we're missing right now?
Totally. I feel like since we've been in quarantine, I've kind of felt like my high school self surrounded by like cast albums and posters and like
right
of seeing a Broadway show, even though I can't see one.
Like that time in our lives when it felt really, really far away.
Yeah, it's been very
now.
Yeah, totally.
I get it. So take me back to a different time, one not so far, but amazingly like months back. March 12th, the Broadway shutdown shockingly begins. Do you remember where you were, what you thought, when you expected it to be over?
I absolutely do, because the day that it all happened and went down was actually my first day on the Tick Tick Boom set. I'm the historian consultant on the movie, and it was my first day there. I had a ticket that night to the first preview of Flying Over Sunset on Broadway at Lincoln Center, and I mentioned that to some people on set that day, and people were like, "Are you sure?" Because rumors were starting to circulate that Broadway was going to shut down. And I sat on the floor in like the food trailer at the end of the day, canceling the next 2 weeks of 54 Below shows, maybe only the next week, just as a, precaution of like, we think this will be 1 or 2 weeks, until we can perform again. At the time, I remember thinking like, how could it possibly only be 2 weeks? But of course, I had no conception that it would be like months,
Right. And initially, we were expecting theater to begin early next year. I think as we've come into the fall, that seemed less likely. But of course, now we've since gotten this like devastating news that Broadway and New York theater likely is not going to begin until June 2021. Where does it? What now? What now? Right. Right.
I think that the really challenging thing is, clearly this is completely unprecedented. That word has almost lost its meaning by how much it's being used, but it truly is. Like, Broadway has never shut down for more than a couple weeks, and when that happened, it was like for a strike. So we've never been shut down like this for this period of time because of a public health crisis. And Broadway being able to reopen is so dependent on so many things that have nothing to do with Broadway and have everything to do with Broadway, having to do with public health. So we don't know when there's going to be a vaccine, if there will be a vaccine. Hopefully there will. We don't know when New York City is going to have numbers that deem it safe to open up spaces where we're all crowded together. We don't know how testing and contact tracing and how that is handled federally is going to handle getting actors on stage safely and backstage crew back at their jobs. So there's just so many question marks. And honestly, it could be summer. Like, I'm hopeful that could happen. It might not be. It might be longer. And I think that we might for sure see, a lot of people have talked about it. It's going to have to be a gradual reopening for so many reasons. And the reopening success is really tied into also what kind of governmental help there's going to be to rebuild, ticket advances, to get people feeling safe coming back to New York City as tourists. All of these things are going to kind of collide with each other to hopefully create like a really successful next beginning era of theater history. But it's definitely not something that like Broadway can decide on their own. It's so dependent on what goes on in the greater atmosphere around us.
Literally, it can't be like June 1, curtains up.
No. No, so there was this like fantasy, I'm sure maybe you saw some of this too, like at the beginning of quarantine, we were all like, oh, it'll be so magical that first night back, all the audiences up and down Times Square applauding. And I'm like, it'll be the opposite of that. I think that we'll see shows that have the ability to come back first being shows that can withstand having like a couple of months, weeks, who knows, of like losses, in order to like rebuild that audience confidence, in order to make sure that this is all going to work. We're not going to see 41 Broadway theaters with shows reopening at once.
No, and that's just part of the heart. It's like a compounding thing, right? You can't think about it all at once. But take me back to what you were working on at the time of the shutdown. You mentioned just briefly you were working on the film of Tick Tick Boom, and also you are a creative director of 54 Below, which, if you don't know, is this wonderful Broadway supper club, and Jen is responsible for all of the incredible shows there. So you sat on the floor and you started canceling things day by day. But how was the film production affected, and what happened with 54 for the immediate future? How did you guys go on from there?
You know, what's been interesting is that I think everybody, people, you know, at 54 Below, everybody in theater in general, people in film sets, like there was this immediate shutdown. And then from there was like a slow, like, how do we get back to this thing when it's safe? What kinds of things can we do online? All of the ways that like theater people have been kind of pivoting during this time, figuring out strategically, like, who can do that? How do we do it? And all of that. So, you know, with 54 Below, what's been interesting is, as creative director, we've taken things like 1 month at a time, because we're in a 147 seat venue. So who knows, it might end up being like safe and legal for us to open before Broadway. Like there's not, again, we're like playing it by ear. We don't know. And also, you know, I think every theater in existence has kind of tried to figure out like how much reduced capacity can we, like, you know, sustain. There have been a lot of those conversations. So with 54 Below, yeah, I've had the kind of privilege of like checking in with hundreds of artists like every month, because like I'm just connected to, obviously we're in a very unique position where we have so many different shows. So I'm like reaching out to all kinds of like performers and musicians all the time and being like, you know, we should probably move your September show to April. And also like, will you be back in New York? And having a lot of those kinds of conversations with people in the community, which have been interesting. But, you know, as soon as it's safe and okay to reopen, we will, and we'll be back. I can't imagine how exciting that's going to be. And, you know, obviously everyone's talking about this a lot too, but the actual being in a room with people watching live performance, like I was at an outdoor concert that my close friend and collaborator Joe Iconis did a couple weeks ago in Vermont, and just like seeing him sit down at a keyboard, I was like, oh God. So I truly can't imagine, once we're watching full performances together again, it's going to be incredible and like very special.
Is there something, I was thinking about this the other day, like I never thought I'd miss standing in a line to go into a theater, or I never thought I'd miss I guess it's lines again, the long lines to the bathroom, or, you know, I'm little, but still there are theaters where you can't get you know, I can't get my knees in, and you're much taller than me, so that must be much worse for you. Is there something you're like, I never thought I'd say I miss this when it comes to the theater, and now you just give anything to have that?
That's such a good question, but the truth is, like, I really always cherish, like, kind of the underappreciated things about the theater. So, like, that is something I feel like I think about a lot anyway. I will say I took, like, a socially distanced walk today, was walking down 34th Street, and thought to myself very oddly, like, this block smells like a rush line. So I had a moment of being like, I miss the rush line, which really just means it smelled like, you know, hot dogs and, like, street air.
Right. What does the rush line smell like?
Smells like the city. But no, I really miss just like the camaraderie of it all. I think like that's what so many of us are missing, theater people and not theater people. It's like gathering with groups of friends and like being able to have so many contacts in person, and that's like manifested in what theater is, which is people being in the same room, you know, communicating with each other on stage and off.
So you just mentioned you were walking down 34th Street today. Have you been back to the theater district? Have you been in a theater? Your secret's safe with me. I won't tell anybody.
No, also a good question. I would tell you if I had. I kind of, you know, there are safe ways to go into a theater, so I kind of wish I had. I know that some people have been going in and taking photos and doing some historic things like that. I live close enough to the theater district that I take a lot of walks around. And honestly, as a historian, it's very much of interest to me, not just the theaters, but what's going on with all the businesses around them, what restaurants have closed, what restaurants are like, you know, pivoting and opening outside, what's going on with the hotels. I walked down 8th Avenue today and was like noting kind of which hotels have been staying in operation and which have totally closed. It's all, you know, theater is like part of an ecosystem. New York City is like obviously theater is so essential to New York, but New York is so essential to theater. So I've just been trying to kind of like observe things from afar as I walk around.
Can I go back for a second? What happened and how are things going with the Tick Tick Boom film? Because I would imagine I don't know where you guys were in the process there. You were sitting on the floor of a food truck and then the shutdown happened.
Yeah, I think because we're so lucky in that film and TV can kind of pick up in a way that theater can't. There are things like in process with the film now. So I'm so excited for people to see it. I don't think anyone's prepared for how amazing it's going to be.
That's a good one because obviously you have a crew and a big team, but there's only 3 cast members. Although, did you guys build it out?
Yeah, it's the movie. So there's been some casting announced of other characters beyond those 3 for sure.
Okay, all right. I'm going to just wait and be very excited to find out. So talk to me as there's going to be more than a year gap in Broadway and just like the life cycle of a show. How do you expect that to change? Like the pipeline process for how a show is produced and made and what we're going to see when we get back?
That's a great question. So many of the like issues and like things people want to see move in different directions are so profound and like so many things I want to happen. And the question I keep asking myself is like, where does the money come for this to happen? Who is paying for that? Who buys tickets to that so that can happen?
Sound like a producer.
Yeah, honestly, what's crazy is like, in America, we're not lucky enough to have like a national theater system or subsidized theater. Obviously not-for-profits do what they do, but they're dependent on donors. So with all of these kinds of, what kinds of shows will we be seeing and what kinds of theaters will come back first and all of that, it's gonna really depend on like who has the resources when things reopen and also like what people want to see. I don't think that what that is like, oh, they'll be all uplifting shows or all political shows or all new musicals or all old musicals. Like, I don't think it's ever that simple. But I do think there's like a question to be asked and like, who's going to be investing in theater when we reopen and like, what kinds of things are those people going to want to invest in? So I've certainly been like trying to like have those conversations. I do think that people are going to have the sense that it will take a while for things to rebuild and maybe we won't see the riskiest shows opening right when theaters reopen. But what's really tricky about that is like when we think about like, oh, as I talked about earlier, like what are the shows with the deep pockets that can open and like run for a little while? The long runners, right? The Wickeds, the Phantoms, the Chicagos, which like are very reliant on tourists who like might not be the first to come back. So it's like hand in hand, maybe we will see like risky theater because that's typically associated most with like what New Yorkers want and New Yorkers will be the ones going to the theater first. It'll be interesting to see the first things that reopen, like taking the temperature and what that tells us about like what people are willing to put on stage.
Well, you have your ear closest to the ground, if you will. So what are you hearing does anybody have any plans?
I think like what's tricky is there are so many things in development. Like there are so many new things in development.
But Music Man says it's coming back. That's like a, not risky, but I feel like we would see anything. No shade on Music Man.
Sure.
But we'll go to see anything right now. And everybody loves Music Man. So that would also bring the tourists in. So I feel like that's a good bet. I'm not going to say a sure bet, but that's a good bet that Hugh is coming. One way or another.
I walk by it all the time and I'm like, Sutton Foster, she's my fave. But yeah, no, I think what I really mean is that like, I don't think any of us should be discouraged if what we see at the beginning of the reopening is not all the new work and all the like incredible artists who like were up and coming when this like all happened and new people coming to the forefront that weren't there yet, but now have like had all this time to create. I think that there will be a super exciting next era of theater. I just don't necessarily think all of those things will happen in the like immediate reopening. That said, there's a lot of like outdoor theater and exciting things that are going to happen in the next 6 months before Broadway reopens. So like we might see all kinds of new awesome things in that era of time.
What is your advice, if you will, from a producer perspective, if you will, for the performers, for the creatives? What else can they do to just survive in this time? I mean, the shutdown has been longer for them than it has for most other working professionals, right?
Totally. It's been so challenging because I think that like it's the bigger picture of it is terrible. I mean, like I have so many friends that have had to like leave the city and like have not had health insurance, and like it's obviously not just performers, it's like everyone in our industry.
Right.
No one I know has had a job since March. And when I talk to anyone outside of our field, I'm like, literally, like, nobody I know has had a job since March. I think that, like, the tricky thing is at this point, like, I'm not telling anyone, like, advice-wise or friend-wise, like, hey, you should write the Great American Musical. It's more like we should all just, like, continue to try to take care of ourselves and each other and, like, try to do everything we can to like get the vote out and to like help out with what's going on in the world right now, because that's really like what's important. And I think that especially when I talk to younger theater folks and like students and people that are kind of just graduating, it's a lot of like just hang on and like don't get discouraged that this is going to go on forever, because it's not, and do what you need to do financially and otherwise to just kind of get by and through it. And like if you have like the resources and time, like all those books you wanted to read about theater that you never have time to read, or like the thing that you really wanted to like watch all of, whether it's like every year of the Tony Awards or whatever else is going to help you like marinate your theater brain and your heart to like kind of keep interested and creative. And maybe that's writing or reading or whatever, but at this point it's like 8 months in, it's not really a matter of like professional things, it's a matter of like mental health and keeping yourself okay.
Absolutely. The Tony Awards were last week. That plays such a big part into the world of producing and a show's survival and what comes next. But it's such a weird season, and these are some weird awards. How has that affected, I guess, just the industry as a whole?
Totally. My main thought on it, one thought I had, which was really interesting, is like, based on just the circumstances of only having really fall shows that could be nominated, we've kind of created this like hurricane of like trends where the jukebox musicals mostly open in the fall and the new musicals mostly open in the spring, because they're like less dependent or more dependent on things that are not branding. Like if you're the Tina Turner musical, you might be able to open in the fall and you're branded as the Tina Turner musical, whereas something like newer opens in the spring. So we ended up with like a slate of mostly jukebox musicals, which will make it seem historically like that's what this season was, but it's really just that it was like the fall half. So I thought that was interesting. Honestly, one of my main takeaways was like, it could be a very long time until we have a Tony Awards again. And the fact that like we probably, hopefully will be reopening next summer, but maybe not, who knows? Again, like that, when we reopen, it's not going to be a slate of like a full season of new musicals. So I really took it as like a way that the Tony Awards were going to honor these shows and these artists, because it would be impossible to have like 4 years from now them pitted against shows that had just opened when they had been closed for like 4 years. So just thinking about it that way, and like as like a gesture towards those shows to try to like make sure that they had a Tony Awards, it made sense in that way to me.
What is your advice though for how we get back into a theater in the fastest way possible? What are the safety procedures and mechanisms that you and other producers are talking about for what theater is going to look like for when we can finally hold out that ticket and walk through those doors?
In the like absolute dream world, in the like dreamy dream world, there's a vaccine that's very effective that a lot of people take based on a campaign that convinces them to get it. That brings the numbers down to a degree that it can be safe to reopen theaters with audiences fully masked, with all kinds of precautions taken to make the spaces safer, from like ventilation to egress, all things that everyone who works in the theater are talking about, and prioritizing all kinds of like testing and contact tracing and things like that, especially for people that are like working on the shows, but even for the audience as well. It's going to be kind of a combination of all of those things that create like a much safer place for us to gather. Because at the end of the day, the truth is like everyone has like crunched numbers and tried to do things, but most theater can't happen at a low enough capacity that would create social distancing. Like we just unfortunately don't have that like ability, unless the government was like, take all this money, reopen every theater at 25%. Like that's kind of what I mean by the like somebody has to pay for everything. So if there was some program
just perform for me,
I mean, it'd be fun. And at the end of the day, it's like, even with a very socially distanced audience, or even if it was just like you and me sitting at the Nederlander, there's still performers on stage. Even in a one-person show, there's still box office people and dressers. Like, we need all of these safety things to happen. It's not sustainable to go like, let's reopen Broadway at 25%, even not just financially, but like in terms of all the structural things that come along with theater. So I think that in a dream world, we'll have that dream scenario next year.
Talk to me a little bit more about the aid and support that the community needs from outside resources, from the government. What needs to be done?
Yeah, I think of it as being kind of really threefold. The first thing is like, we need government relief and support for theater workers that have no way of working right now. So we need like aid and like unemployment and all these things that help sustain the community, so that when we go back to work, the only people that have been able to stay in the industry aren't just the most privileged people. Like, that's a huge part of what this is. We need like unemployment relief. The second part is government help to actually reopen the shows and the theaters and the organizations. It's like the kind of loan situation that exists in other industries, like the airline industry, all kinds of other kind of communities that are getting help in that way to reopen, from like having to rehire their staff to having to pay for all the new safety precautions. So it's like loans directly to shows and theaters. And then the third thing is, I think we really need and are going to need a government campaign of getting people back to New York. In other times of crisis, financial and otherwise, there have been huge campaigns to say New York is safe, New York is exciting, New York has all these entertainment options. We need some kind of larger campaign about getting people back to the theater. So I think honestly, like, I have hope in my heart that those things will come down the pike. It'll really depend a lot on what happens next month. So the best and most helpful thing anyone can do is like get out the vote for voting blue down the ticket.
Do you have hope as well that this tragic situation, truly tragic, will also somehow bring about some good and some evolution for the theater?
Absolutely. Obviously, like, I have great hope that a lot of the discussions about like anti-racism and about just like structural change within the theater will yield very positive results as we kind of move forward through this. I also really think that like we're going to see improvements in terms of inclusivity and in terms of like the way that streaming and like video content is treated with theater. I think that hopefully, like one of the parts of a lot of theaters reopening is going to have to be a hybrid model of streaming and live performance. So we've had just streaming for so long, people are trying to figure out how artists can be fairly compensated. I think we're going to end up in a world where there are both of those things as a hybrid, and artists are hopefully, fairly compensated, which kind of I don't think would have happened if we hadn't been forced to do it. I've been trying to look at that as a positive. I know that there's a lot of like puzzles and factors to figure out with the unions and all of that, but hopefully at some point, we'll live in a world where you're watching some performance and you can buy a ticket, or you can not be able to buy a ticket because you live in Ohio and you can like access it online in a way that you couldn't maybe before this time.
Yeah, I mean, I think the live arts and live events field is going to have to move into the streaming world as well.
Yeah, and what's awesome is that I really think like live performance will never go away. Theater will never go away. It's so important. It's so unique. I want to be in a theater with other people more than anything. I think that when this is over, there will be such an appetite for that. So it won't be just like everyone only wants to stream things now. But having both options, I think, will actually create new audiences for theater. If everybody has the ability, I don't think every movie that's ever come out, every pro shot that's ever come out has damaged the property. Most of the time those pro shots and movies have really made people want to see it live even more. So it all just, I think, is helping each other.
Absolutely. From a historian's perspective, have you looked into or been able to the Spanish flu of 1918 and what Broadway was like then and what happened? I was reading a little bit, but I mean, I have found, looking back, it almost gives me hope, like that we did get through that, we will get through this.
Totally. Actually, what was crazy was I did a little talk, having connected with TEDx Broadway about this topic, but it was in like April. It was like very beginning of the pandemic, and I did a lot of research on it then, when things were very different in our world. But what was fascinating to me was that Broadway never fully shut down in 1918. Other cities shut down their theaters, but Broadway didn't. I found some fascinating advertisements that were like, "Come to the theater, just don't spit on anyone," and I was like, "Great job." It was a very world, most people that went to Broadway shows walked to the theater to see them then. Like literally the theater community, it wasn't like, hey, we're coming from Japan, we're coming from Chicago, we're gathering all these people in a theater who have all these different like potential germ journeys. Wow, I'm a scientist now. But it was just a very different kind of like industry then. So I think that impacted like what happened. But that said, like that was it was a very terrible time. And it honestly, like it coupled with like the war, coupled with all kinds of things going on financially in New York, like you're right. Like we did get through that and we will get through this, and it's got parallels, even though it's different.
Yeah. Was there one show that you didn't get to see because of the shutdown? And that's the one that like you're thinking about, like I really wish I had gotten to see that show, and maybe you'll get to see it again, maybe you won't. Is there one from the season that was to be?
Yeah, what's horrifying to me is like I'm so anti-spoiler. Like I never want to see B-roll before I see a show. Like I just like to like see something early so then I can like watch all the interviews and read everything, but I don't like to like be spoiled. So for me, like I obviously have seen a lot of productions of Company, but I didn't get to see this one before the shutdown. And people keep being like, "Oh my God, remember when?" And I'm like, "No, I don't want to know." I've spent 8 months being like avoiding spoilers, but a show I've seen a million times. How about you? What's your show that you wish you got to see?
For a split second I forgot about that, and I'm holding out hope for that one, that it's going to come back. But what came to mind really sickly is Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, because I have like a voyeuristic love of watching other couples fight and just knowing it's not me. So there was that one. Wasn't that the first to officially like close because of the shutdown? So I don't think I'm getting to that one anytime soon. So we'll have to watch Elizabeth Taylor, fight it out.
Sad.
Yeah, that one of all things. But we'll hopefully Company comes back, and I haven't seen. Have I seen much from the West End production? I don't think so. So I'm excited too. No spoilers.
No spoilers.
So good. I hope that comes back. I really, really hope that comes.
It's hard to say. Like, honestly, I think people, not us, but people in general forget that, like, theater is basically a bunch of startups. It's like any show can make an individual decision based on things that we don't know yet. If the government decides to not help individual shows or organizations at all, like, who are the investors that are going to reinvest in, like, building the ticket advance, in getting people back into the theater as far as rehearsal and paying for redoing things that would need to be redone technically? It's just a matter of, like, whoever's in charge of each show, like the lead producer or like the CEO, going like, what things do we have to pay for, and like what is the risk, and all of these things, once we know a lot of things that we don't know yet.
But it will be back. I miss it terribly. But you're giving me hope that it's coming back.
It's definitely coming back, and it's going to be a really exciting time to like be there for like the reopening and the rebuilding and the next era. It is coming back, and it's just like a shame that it's going to be so long. We have to be so patient because I miss it too.
It'll feel really, really good to clap with all those other people. Can you imagine those performers getting to take that bow that first time? It'll feel really good. It'll be well deserved, truly well deserved. Well, Jennifer, thank you so much for talking to me today, giving, as I said, a lot of hope for Broadway and the industry and what's to come, and a lot to look forward to, I hope.
I think there definitely is. Thank you for having me. It was nice to
Absolutely. This has been Let's Talk About It. We'll talk to you, and we'll talk more about Broadway next time.